I ask unanimous consent that Chairman Dingell, his full statement be made part of record. The objection. Also note for record, Mr. Inslee was here. I guess he's going to be back, and he'll be allowed to, he's a member of the full committee, would be allowed to ask questions of this panel. And we have three different parts of this panel, if you will. We'll probably go more than one round question, so we'll try to go 5 minutes, and we'll come back if we have to. Ms. Collard, let me ask you a couple questions, if I may. On tab 38 is the first tab I sort of see in here in the binder. It's a November 2nd, 2006 letter to Mr. Parnell of CPA, or PCA, Peanut Corporation of America, PCA. In 2006, were you consulting with them as to their plant and Salmonella? In looking at this, it looks like you were acting more as a consultant as opposed to lab testing, right?
At this point, I received a phone call, our JLA received a phone call, and they had a problem, or they reported a problem with some Salmonella in some peanut granules, and they needed someone to do a walkthrough of the facility. And so by proximity, based in Albany, Georgia, and I have that background, I did go through and do a walkthrough and tried to help them understand where the Salmonella was coming from on that particular issue.
Okay. So in 2006, JLA was not testing. You sort of did a walkthrough to try to figure out where the Salmonella was coming from.
Right. I didn't pull any samples at that point.
Okay.
Our company has a microbiology department that does testing, and then
Sure.
there's another piece that will help,
Sure.
as you just.
And in this tab 38 there, in this letter, you sort of indicated three sources, right? It could have come from the organic Chinese peanuts.
That was what they told me when I arrived there, that was the source of the granules.
Okay. Or I think you identified it could have come from production, because there was some question about not cooking it long enough, high enough temperatures to kill the Salmonella, right? To have a kill off.
What I asked for was documents for the time and temperature of the roaster, and that could not be provided at the time.
And then, of course, there was also in the packaging, because they were using water in the packaging area, and we all know water is a great source of Salmonella, especially in peanut butter, as we know from the 2007 ConAgra outbreak.
Yes, sir. And also, if you'll note in the letter, it also talks about packaging roasted product in a raw zone.
Correct. Correct. Okay, so we had three possibilities there identified in your letter there. Let me go next to Exhibit 40. Okay. Just two back. Mm-hmm. That is dated February 4th, 2008. Now, at this point in time, because you're talking about a kill study, and you're making suggestions as a kill study, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I believe they contacted our Edenton, North Carolina facility to help them understand a kill step study for their roaster. And we were trying to understand how to go about doing that. That's not something that we had ever done before as a laboratory. And so this was a new process for us, and so we were trying to understand how to do that. Okay,
so between 2006 2008, is it fair you consulted, JLA was a consultant into the Peanut Corporation of America?
No, sir, we were not. This was a moment in time in 2006, and I didn't have any follow-up with them after that.
Okay, so 2006, and you didn't have any follow-up with them until 2008, until this possible kill study, right?
Correct. They contacted us, and that's how it usually worked with PCA from JLA's perspective. We are an independent testing laboratory, and we do microbiology testing. If they have a question, right, we will try to answer their question. Okay.
So between 2006 and then again 2008, I mean 2006 you knew they had Salmonella. Did you have any indication in 2008 at the time this memo was written, which is February 4th, that they had other occurrences of Salmonella at the Blakely plant?
No, sir. I was not aware of them. No, sir.
Okay. You indicate in here that on again, the same document, February 4th, on Monday you're starting to using oven at 3 different temperatures. You're going to use these spore strips, which was something different. Well, what's the cost of those spore strips?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Sure. Third paragraph from bottom. It says, Monday, I am starting a lab study I am starting a lab study using oven at 3 temperatures, 295, 300, 310 degrees Fahrenheit, with duplicate BI pore strips. exposed to the heat for varying times, and you list the times. To do that, these spore strips, which is to help kill the Salmonella spores, correct? If there's any in there, if you heat it up?
Yes, sir. This is a lab study, and so these
Right.
spore strips, what they were trying to do is not to introduce a pathogenic, but a
Correct.
surrogate. Yes, sir.
Correct. What would it cost to put these spore strips in with your production?
I'm not sure I know. I don't
Okay.
know that answer.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you support, and it's been suggested throughout today, that labs, food processors, should be registered, should be certified, the people doing the testing, and that the results should be filed with the FDA on every test?
Yes, sir. I think we agree with that. I mean,
Okay.
having heard what we've heard this week and in the papers, I mean, I think it's the right thing to do. I think we'd want to be a part of the solution. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Mr. Dimebell, how about yourself? Do you think labs that do testing, labs should be certified by the FDA, the people who are doing the testing should be registered or make sure they have the proper qualifications, and should the results of every test, whether it's positive or negative, be electronically submitted to the FDA?
In regards to laboratory accreditations, I mean, certainly laboratories should be using the published methods. They should be using good practices in regards to laboratory. We call them GLPs, good laboratory practices. In regards to having a laboratory mandating that the laboratory would submit those test results to government, I don't believe that would be a good practice.
How do you prevent lab shopping then, as has been alleged in this case?
That I don't know. The overriding concern of this, and I'm a consumer, my laboratory does a lot of testing for food safety. We want to have safe food. The entire industry at large, if you look at all the foods that we consume on a daily basis, and I'm not just talking the foods that we make, but the ingredient companies that manufacture ingredients for those, finished product manufacturers, it's an enormous industry. And on a day-to-day basis, most of us eat safely foods, and we don't have an illness. And I think based on that, the huge amount of food companies that are out there, generally, there isn't. My concern, I guess, in reporting those positive results is that you would actually encourage those businesses to test less. There are different types of tests that are done all along the manufacturing practice. You can test
Sure.
a raw ingredient before you use it. You do process validation work. You test your environment. We want to encourage that. We want to encourage companies to find problems if they exist. And again, my overriding concern.
Well, how do we ever know then if a company is having positive test results if they're not reporting it to anybody but themselves?
Every year, millions of pounds of products feed landfills. So companies find a positive result, destroy product, do not ship it.
In theory they do that, right? Because obviously you're here, they didn't do it.
Correct. I guess a food company is, it is a business. And when they're not in business to manufacture a product that will get somebody sick.
Right.
And they're at their best when they can make safe, wholesome products that a consumer will buy, enjoy, and buy again. If a company manufactures a product where somebody eats it, falls ill, they're likely not to be in business.
So it's just the cost of doing business then when people get sick?
Most food companies do spend, I would say, in my experience,
Sure.
a lot of money and a lot of their efforts, their resources, in making safe and wholesome foods.
Yeah, but
And we would want to have them be able to have the right to test as much as they can, find a problem.
right, but this is our 9th hearing in 2 years. If we don't get on this thing, if we don't require some kind of reporting, how are we going to end this? I mean, we can't be doing this every, let's see, 9 times in 2 years, every, 2 months? A new outbreak?
It's just one aspect of the overall food safety program.
I agree.
And we really need to be focusing more on preventative strategies because even in testing, we see this in the example with PCA. Even when several labs were involved testing, we always didn't find it, even though we knew it was there.
Because no one was reporting it,
It became known that it was.
because nobody was reporting it. So I agree with you, we should be proactive as opposed to reactive. Right now, we're reactive. If we had reporting mandatory, maybe we could be proactive. With that, turn to Mr. Walden for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that's a question I want to go to the FDA on. Wouldn't you benefit from knowing the lab results?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, FDA, like any other enforcement organization, wants all the information we can get.
And you don't get those lab results today,
That's
correct?
true. That's true.
And would you be overwhelmed with the number of lab results you would get?
It's hard to say. I mean, but certainly having that information available would be very helpful.
Only if it's in a form and that could be readily accessed and utilized. Seems to me like there ought to be a modern era of computers, a way where those lab results could go in and then flag if there's a facility that repeatedly tests positive for Salmonella, would help you identify where you need to go inspect, wouldn't it?
I believe that's right.
Now let me go back to Mr. Dybel. I'm troubled with this notion that those lab results shouldn't be shared with the FDA or the Georgia Department of Agriculture or whomever. And I don't disagree that I think they should be inspected. I think they should seek out. I think as a small business person, I had nothing to do with food, but it seems to me in their best self-interest to make sure their product line works and is sanitary and all. They don't want to make, in theory, most don't, want to make somebody sick. So what's the harm in sharing those positive results with the regulators so that they're on notice there may be a problem here?
From a laboratory level, we always don't understand what types of samples are coming into our laboratories.
Right.
So it could be part of an environmental monitoring where product fell on the floor and they want to test that.
Okay, but couldn't we?
Samples. They could be doing a new R&D project.
Right,
we
but
just don't know.
Okay, but how hard would it be to have a row of boxes that says this is a R&D sample test, this is a off-the-floor sample, this is something that's going into the Austin crackers that some 3-year-old's going to eat? Is that hard?
That wouldn't be hard. However, I don't know that would happen.
All right. Well, that's a different question. So if the private lab doesn't collect the samples, how can you ensure the integrity of those samples? Can you, Ms. Cowart? You don't know. They just send you whatever, right?
Correct. What happens with our company is we receive samples into our laboratory with the request for analysis, and we do the analysis that is written on the request form. We do not know where the samples came from. We don't know the history of them. And so our obligation as an independent laboratory is to run the test and to notify them the accuracy and speed that we can to get that to them. And
it sounds like you have a very thorough process to do that, which I commend you for, both email and a voice
Thank you. Yes,
process. So let me go back to this notification. We learned yesterday, sometime this week, that there's this mystery peanut processing plant in Texas that apparently has never been reviewed by the FDA, no regulators have been in there. Is that correct?
No, sir. The FDA was in there in 2001 inspecting, but at that time they were not producing peanut butter or peanut paste.
Have you been back since?
I'm sorry.
Have you been back since they've been producing peanut butter or paste?
Yes. I'm sorry. Which plant are we talking
about?
The
one in Texas.
Oh, the one in Texas. Yes. I'm sorry. Let me retract that. No, we had not been in there.
Were you aware it even existed?
We were.
You were aware? Because
yes.
Some of the news accounts indicate nobody knew this thing was going on. It wasn't registered, wasn't inspected. Do you know if it had been inspected?
I don't believe it had been inspected.
So if Mr. Dybel, if I understood you correctly, your company was actually doing tests from peanut product from that plant and discovered there was salmonella in some of that plant's product. Is that accurate?
The Texas facility?
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
So if you had to report that to the FDA, then the FDA would have known there was salmonella in a plant they had never inspected.
We did report that.
To the FDA?
The subcommittee. We reported this to the subcommittee. I'm unsure of if we reported it.
Oh, wait a minute. When did you do the salmonella test?
The result just came off this last Sunday.
Okay, so you just found out about this.
Yes.
But You didn't report that, I mean, you knew we were doing an investigation, so you shared it with us in that context. You wouldn't normally have sent us just sort of randomly test results, right? Of course not. But had you reported test results to anybody before?
We report test results to our clients, but there's no mechanism currently in place to
Right. And that's what we're, in the other context of the full committee, going to debate is what is the mechanism that should be there? We don't want to, I mean, I'm not an advocate of just sending enormous amounts of data to another government agency that'll put it in boxes, that'll go in a warehouse that'll probably leak, and we can produce peanuts there too. But, you know, it doesn't make sense. So it's got to be something that's usable. And so had you done tests prior to the ones this week on that plant in Texas?
We've been doing results for them for a number of years.
Number of years, and had you spotted salmonella in any of those tests?
No, everything was negative up to the point of
this last
results
week?
on Sunday, yes.
Dr. Cowart, did your firm do any tests in that plant in Texas?
On the Texas facility, no, sir, we did no microbiology testing.
And why do you think, I find it curious that your firm consistently found salmonella. Mm-hmm. You said 6 times in 07 and 4 in 08?
That's correct.
And then it sounds like PCA decided we're going to go somewhere else. Is that your read of it?
After reviewing the documents and talking with our associates back at the laboratory, it appears that way, yes, sir.
And then they sort of sent you one under the name of an internal operation just to, I guess, have you do that test.
That's right. And again, not knowing the history of the samples, we just took the sample.
You do the test.
Did the test. That's correct. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Did you know whether or not PCA went to any other labs?
We were aware of, they were asking us about a high coliform count and an aerobic plate count, and so in an effort to answer their question, we did ask them if they could send us the results of the aerobic plate count and the coliform count just to compare.
Right.
Because we obviously go into a diagnostic mode also.
Sure.
And so we did know that they had used another lab for that, yes.
And then do you, like, check the calibration of your equipment and all of that to just see?
Yes, sir, we do, and we also are in quarterly proficiency sample test so that we can be able to check against an unknown sample that would come in from a proficiency organization.
All right. And Mr. Dybel, do you have any idea, I mean, why your data would be different than JLA's data?
Just based on
how does all that work?
We're dealing with a dry commodity good, and as it had been mentioned before, you know, water does play a role in growing these organisms. And so the results are not always going to be consistent within that sample. And so you will get some degree of variability in those test results.
I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony and answer to our questions. It's helpful in our efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Thank you. Mr. Braley for questions, please.
Thank you. Dr. Sundloff, as I understand it, the FDA did not conduct inspections of the PCA plant in Blakely, Georgia from 2001 until January of 2009. Is that correct?
That's correct. Now, we did, again, inspect in 2001. At that time, they were not producing peanut butter or peanut paste. I think it was 2007, the state of Georgia inspected under contract from FDA. So in essence, that was an FDA inspection in 2007 and one in 2008.
Well, after the recent Salmonella outbreak was traced to peanut products in January of 2009, FDA conducted a detailed inspection of the PCA facility and issued an inspection report called a 483 report. And in that report, you listed 12 occasions in 2007 and 2008 when private labs informed PCA that its products tested positive for salmonella. I want to ask you about one of those. According to the 483 report, in June of 2008, the company received a private lab test that was positive for salmonella. And according to your report, the lot was manufactured on June 9th, and the sample that tested positive was provided to the private lab on June 10th. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
Dr. Sundloff, wasn't June 10th the same day the Georgia Department of Agriculture inspected the facility on your behalf?
I would have to check my records.
Well, if that is the case, and that's what the records show, The day after the company produced peanut products with salmonella, your inspectors were inside this facility, but they didn't detect salmonella because you didn't direct them to test for it. Isn't that true?
That is true.
And you had the legal authority to order those tests, didn't you?
Yes.
So why didn't you order salmonella testing that day?
Well, first of all, we did not know of the test results at the time. We did not know of those until January. Secondly, our policy had been that on routine inspections, and this is not for cause inspections, in other words, where we don't suspect that there is a problem in the plant, we have not asked our inspectors in general, whether it's the FDA inspectors or the inspectors under contract, to collect samples or obtain environmental samples. We are changing that now as a result of this.
Well, does your office and do your inspectors apply a heightened degree of suspicion when there are other things going on in the food production business that might alert you to potential problems?
Yes, we do. I mean, we take the entirety of all of the findings into account to determine whether or not it raises us to the next level where we would issue an inspection report of action, that there would be required actions to be taken by the company. In this case, I think all of the inspections, both that were conducted, indicated that there were some infractions, that they didn't immediately pose what appeared to be a risk to the safety of the food supply, and that the company was correcting those deviations either while the inspector was in the plant or gave assurances that those would be corrected.
Well, the reason I asked you that very specific question about a heightened index of suspicion is because in April of 2007, this subcommittee held a hearing on a salmonella outbreak at the ConAgra peanut butter plant in Sylvester, Georgia, which is only 75 miles from the PCA plant, and that outbreak resulted in over 400 illnesses in 44 states. Wasn't that cause enough for FDA to order testing for salmonella at the PCA plant?
After that outbreak of the Peter Pan, we went back and did a lot of education for the peanut industry. There was a seminar that was given in Atlanta in which the entire peanut industry was invited. We had FDA people there. They had other people talking about the kinds of measures that should be put in place in order to prevent this from happening in the future. We looked back at our records and determined that 4 people from PCA were registered to attend that particular symposium.
So then you would agree with me that in this geographic area, in your state, there was certainly a heightened degree of suspicion about the potential for salmonella outbreak at the time these inspections were performed?
Yes.
And are there any written standards that apply to determine when there is for cause to test for salmonella?
I don't believe there is any written ones. I would ask Mike Chappell if he can comment on that.
Well, I do. After the ConAgra series, and we did indeed provide some additional guidance to our field staff. And as Dr. Sunloff just mentioned, the realization is that we probably need to depend more on environmental sampling than we have in the past, not just the for cause, which means the conditions in the plant suggest there are serious problems.
Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that private labs detected salmonella at the PCA facility, but since they only reported it to PCA, the public never found out about it. And that's a difference that we can't afford to have in our food safety system, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Braley. Mr. Deal for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My line of inquiry is in 2 areas. First of all, what are manufacturers required to do? And secondly, what are state and federal authorities allowed to do? Now, in that regard, I would ask, first of all, has peanut butter been classified by FDA as a high-risk product?
I don't believe it has. That may change in the near future.
Do you think that would be an appropriate classification?
I believe so.
All right. If it is so classified, what would change with regard to what the manufacturer must do and what the FDA and state authorities can do?
Certainly, considering it high risk, we would change the way that we inspect, and I think we just addressed that in the future, we are in the process of writing all of our guidance to our inspectors that they will be taking samples of the product and the environment in the future, and that will go a long way, I think, to detecting these problems earlier. There's no, in terms of what is required under good manufacturing practice standards, they are written rather broadly, and they are written more for all foods than specific products. And as such, they are not very prescriptive. You know, what will probably result from this is some stronger guidance that will be more specific about peanut butter as it pertains to the kind of manufacturing controls that need to be put in place and the kinds of inspections that we will do.
Can anything that FDA does by way of classification or otherwise require a peanut butter manufacturer to do product sampling with a specified period of regularity?
Currently, the good manufacturing practice standards are not written that way.
Do you think maybe they should be?
Well, in my testimony, I talked about putting more preventive controls, mandatory preventive controls in place in certain food facilities, and those would, and what we're talking about here is, the term is hazard analysis critical control point, type of quality systems in which all of those kinds of things would be documented for any food process that falls under that kind of preventive control.
In the absence of requiring things like sampling and testing of those samples, then sampling and testing is a voluntary action on the part of the manufacturer. Is that correct?
Currently, that is correct.
And the concern that some people have of requiring disclosure of those voluntary samples, of disclosure of the results, is that as long as it's voluntary, all that may very well do is to have less testing rather than more testing. Do you share that concern?
Yes, I'm well.
Right. I'm sorry, I don't have time for you to elaborate much on it. If you have that concern, then, is that one of the things that your recommendations to Congress has included? Is that one of your recommendations?
We will be working, we're more than happy to work with the administration and the Congress to craft any new legislative authorities that we need. I mean, I think the concern with us is that we need to make sure that it doesn't discourage additional testing. And in other words, if it's required, will companies actually do less testing because they know that the FDA will have access to those records? So it needs to be very carefully thought through how that process works.
Now, one of the problems I understand existed was that you could not access internal records and only had to go under the bioterrorism statutory authority in order to be able to get those internal records. Have you recommended, or would you recommend that that be changed in terms of what the FDA or state authorities acting under your jurisdiction have the right to access internal records? Should they have that right?
Yes, that's the other, again, we are working with the administration on that, but certainly if we had greater authority to access those kinds of records outside of the threshold that's required under the Bioterrorism Act to access those records, we would get a lot more information in a timely manner.
Mr. Garrison, I know that you act in conjunction with your contract authority with FDA to do inspections on their behalf that you're contracted to perform. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you have outlined the fact that money is a shortage factor and the number of inspectors are in short supply to do all that you undertake to do at the state level as well as in your contract capacity. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Currently, we receive funding of about $123,000 through our FDA contract. The state funding for our food protection program is some $6 million of state funds.
I would ask this of both you, Mr. Garrison, and you, Dr. Sunloff, and that is, especially in the area of the FDA, we have seen that one of the ways to augment and get better results is through a user fee program in which the producer has an incentive to have the testing done and in effect pays for that extra cost. We see it in other areas under FDA's jurisdiction. Have you considered a user fee to fund the cost for additional inspections at the federal level and or the state level?
Thank you. We are responding to legislation proposed, the Globalization, Food Globalization Act, in which user fees are part of that, and we will be submitting formal responses and technical assistance on that bill.
At the state level, Mr. Garrison, are user fees contemplated?
I would have to say that would be a pay grade above myself. That would be something that Commissioner Irvin and the state legislature and the governor would have to take up.
It's not in the current proposed legislation then?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir.
Thank you for the extra time.
Ms. Christensen for questions. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Mr. Dingle for questions. Mr. Dingle for questions, please.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first I want to commend you. This is a continuation of the excellent hearings which you had in the last Congress. And I want to commend you for your vigor and your energy and your enthusiasm and for the success of your efforts. You're going to make possible a major reform here, and I want to commend you for that. These questions are all to Dr. Sunloff. Please, Doctor, answer yes or no, because we have relatively little time in which to do this. Food processors should be made to notify the FDA when they begin producing products that have not previously been registered. Do you agree, Doctor? Yes or no?
Could you repeat could you repeat the question?
Please pay attention because we do have limited time here. Food processors should have to notify FDA when they begin producing products that they have not previously registered. Do you agree?
Yes.
In the light of the current crisis with regard to food and drug and producers, should foreign and domestic food facilities be required to have safety plans in place to identify and to mitigate hazards?
In some cases, yes.
Now, what should these plans, should these plans be subject to review by FDA inspectors?
Yes.
Would increased inspections by FDA have potentially prevented the Salmonella outbreak?
It's potentially possible, yes.
In other words, more frequent and more thorough inspections by Food and Drug would have done so. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, if FDA had better trace-back capabilities, would that have helped prevent this Salmonella outbreak?
It would have helped us recall product quicker.
Now, should testing be done on food products be subject to certain safety requirements and be performed only by a laboratory accredited by FDA?
I have no opinion on that at this time.
You will note that you had a number of laboratories which performed tests that either didn't reveal the presence of Salmonella or that were not reported to FDA. If FDA had reliable reports from reliable laboratories, would it not have been better able to protect the public?
Yes. I want to just say about Salmonella testing, you can test the same product several times and not find the Salmonella, and it can be still in there. We suspect that these were all good laboratories and that the failure to confirm a positive was not the laboratory's fault, but the sampling.
I'm driven to the unfortunate conclusion that if that statement is true, Food and Drug probably could have done without laboratory inspections at all, because apparently the laboratory inspections either didn't get communicated to FDA or they didn't reveal the presence of Salmonella. And how does Food and Drug do its job without proper assistance in identifying the presence of pathogens like Salmonella?
We rely heavily on states and private laboratories and others to help us in our mission.
It sounds like you're saying trust everybody. I would add to that my dad's abjuration that you should also cut the cards. Now, should testing be done on food products? No. In the light of the Salmonella outbreak caused by PCA's products, Could this crisis have been mitigated if testing laboratories were required to send their testing results to FDA?
It would have alerted us a lot sooner, yes.
I'm sorry?
It would have alerted us sooner that there was a problem.
So you need both qualified and competent laboratories, and you need to have them registered, and you need to have them send their results to Food and Drug so that you know what's going on, right?
Again, we appreciate all the information that we can get.
Okay. Should FDA have authority to issue mandatory recalls of tainted foods?
We are more than happy to discuss that. It depends, I believe, on how the law is written and what...
You do not have that authority now.
We do not.
And you need it if you're to do your job effectively, do you not?
It would be helpful, yes.
Not more than helpful, it's necessary. Isn't that so?
I can tell you that we, almost in every case, when we ask companies to recall product, they do it voluntarily.
All right. Now, Food and Drug was not able to investigate the Peanut Corporation or to visit or inspect Peanut Corporation of America for about 8 years. Is that right? And then they turned the matter over to Georgia, which in 2 years is supposed to have visited PCA, but they didn't find a thing. And what caused the failure of FDA to be able to inspect the people who are subject to their jurisdiction? I'm told that the Department of Agriculture can investigate and can visit and inspect dog food producers oftener than Food and Drug can inspect food producers. Do you need more resources at Food and Drug to carry out proper inspections or not?
We would like to do more inspections, yes.
Well, you're not doing the inspections that need to be done, so you are not able to protect the people. PCA tells us clearly that the consumers were not protected because tainted and unsafe salmonella-infected peanut products and peanut butter got on the market. And with more resources, you could have done a better job of protecting the public. Is that not so?
It's not clear in this case.
It's not clear?
It's not clear in this case.
8 years you couldn't investigate them? That's clear to me. And then Georgia investigated them, and they couldn't do a good job. So that tells me that Food and Drug does not have either the resources. Look, you're caught in a cleft stick here. Either you don't have the resources, or you are incompetent to do the job you're supposed to do. Which conclusion am I to arrive at?
I would hope the former.
That you don't have the resources. I'm content to believe that you're incompetent, but I have tried to defend you against that and point out that you need resources. What I get from you, however, is a modified reluctance to have more resources. And I am distressed because I think that the only way Food and Drug is going to amount to hill of beans is to have the resources that it needs and to have the statute that it needs and to have the leadership that it needs. I find the leadership lacking. I find the resources lacking. And you are driving me to the conclusion that perhaps maybe Food and Drug is not as diligent as it should be because it might have the resources. Now, what is your response to that?
Well, obviously, we need to be inspecting more frequently. And in this particular case, there was we should have been taking environmental samples. That would have led us to find problems earlier. We should have been more directive to the state of Georgia in directing them to take environmental samples. Had they done that, we might have detected this sooner.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, and you have been very gracious. I thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dingell. On behalf of all the members, when they were doing the tribute on the floor on your resolution, we all would have liked to have been there, but we were doing, as you have taught us, to do oversight. So forgive us for not being up at when they did the House resolution in tribute to your longevity on the floor. I know some of us will be doing after hours tonight, paying tribute to your length of service, but more than that, the quality of service you provided the American people. Mr. Gingrey for questions, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And following up on the Chairman Emeritus's line of questioning, let me address my first question to Dr. Sundloff of the FDA. You know, I think as I read your testimony that FDA actually went into Blakely, Georgia, to inspect this PCA plant on January 9th, 2009. And this was based on the information that had been obtained by Minnesota Department of Public Health that clearly that there was salmonella in an open container of this peanut butter product. And yet you go there and you find pretty quickly in going through the records of the company and some of the lab reports that were submitted by these two labs, these private labs, which, by the way, I don't feel are necessarily responsible for not notifying the FDA. I mean, their job is basically a contract with the company. It's just like if a physician does a blood sample on someone and sends it to a lab, and it's a low hemoglobin as an example. Well, the laboratory is going to report back to the doctor and maybe even flag that low, particularly if it's a dangerously low number, but that's where their responsibility ends. I mean, they cannot run down every patient and interfere with the doctor-patient relationship. So, you know, it may be that's something that we should change, and I'll get to that question in just a minute. But my question for you is, if FDA went in and knew on January 9th that with beyond a reasonable doubt that this was the source of the contamination, and yet waited another 10 days or so to get some unopened can of peanut butter from somewhere in Connecticut to absolutely unequivocally prove that it came, couldn't you have had the ability to say to the company, cease and desist until we can prove this? If we disprove it, then you know you continue operations, and maybe the federal government, the FDA, mitigates any financial loss. But when you just continue to get to the nth degree for another 10 days, I don't know how many more hundreds of people got sick, or maybe even additional deaths because of that delay. Why couldn't you have issued a cease and desist order at that time?
I believe we went in on the 9th. I believe that was a Friday. The company recalled on the following Monday. So we did move very quickly.
Well, the company recalled, a certain product that was produced, and then it was later that they recalled, and then finally they had another recall that went all the way back to January 2007. But that probably should have been done immediately.
We can only work with the information that we have at the time. At that time, that we only knew of the products that were the King Nut products as being the source. We moved quickly. They quit producing on that day and quit marketing on that day on the 9th of January and started recall of the products that we knew were affected by the following Monday.
Let me move on to Mr. Garrison with the Georgia Department of Agriculture. Do you feel like that the department, under contract with FDA, had sufficient training? Were there any manuals in regard to the inspectors that work with the Department of Agriculture? And did you have enough training and guidance to properly inspect?
Training is always a continual issue when you're looking at the evolving food continuum that we see. There has been a lot of advances in food processing, a lot of new programs brought online. As Dr. Sundloff stated, HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. Those inspections are now required in seafood processors and in juice processors. So where there is specific training required of an operator of a facility, then our inspectors are also provided with that training. We have taken the good manufacturing practices from FDA. Those are adopted into state regulations, and those are also in our performance manual that we utilize.
And Mr. Garrison, did the department abide by the terms of the contract in regard to the frequency of inspection?
Yes, sir. The terms of the contract only lays out one inspection in the assigned facilities during a calendar year. unless there is an indication by FDA that a follow-up would be necessary based on documentation.
Let me real quickly ask our lab folks, if you'll bear with me, Mr. Chairman, if you were required to submit a copy of your report, certainly a positive report, let's say, to the FDA, how much more expense or burden would that be for the laboratories? How much more would you have to charge the food processor that had contracted with you to do the lab testing if you were required to submit a duplicate copy to the FDA?
Mr. Ginger, I can speak specifically for our company. All of our documents are emailable in a new system that we've put in place since August of 2007. So it would be very simple to email to whoever in FDA would be the appropriate person.
Mr. Diebel, would you agree with that?
Yes, we have a LIMS system where we can plug in on each client contact that would want to report. The system, once we go through our checks and balances to ensure that the result is accurate and authorized, once that's authorized, it's automatically either emailed or faxed to whomever.
So easily done, not expensive, and nothing you would object to if we decide that should be done in the future.
If that was something that you know, this body decided, it would not be a
Chairman, I'll yield back. I know my time has expired.
Ms. Christensen for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to direct my first question to Dr. Sundloff. Also, I had a chance to look through some of the Senate testimony, and the Director of Food Safety for the Center for Science and Public Interest had what I'm going to read to you in her testimony. She says that in April of 2008, Canada rejected a shipment of peanuts from PCA as unfit for food. PCA attempted to clear the peanuts for sale in the U.S., but FDA rejected its test results, and eventually the peanuts were destroyed. During that period, wouldn't that have sent a red flag up to FDA, and shouldn't that have caused FDA to require more inspections of PCA, given the fact that this is April of 2008? Because the testimony goes on to say that FDA did not follow up with an inspection of the plant.
Yeah, that's not entirely true. The shipment was rejected because it was peanut granules, and it was determined that it contained some metal fragments in there. It was returned back to PCA. FDA witnessed its destruction so that it did not move into commerce. At that time, we also asked that the state of Georgia do an additional inspection in that facility. That was one of the two that was conducted under FDA contract, and they went in there, I think, in May or June was when they went back in to inspect. I believe they determined what the source of the metal was, and that the firm took corrective actions.
Okay, and Mr. Garrison, you're familiar with those inspections? There was. Was it your testimony that you found no evidence for any contamination in those inspections? Was it a complete inspection, or was it just related to the metal?
What the email that we received from FDA stated was it was to be a contract inspection and focusing on GMPs, which is what the contract states, and also looking for any metal inclusion that may have occurred and to check out the metal detector. What we reported back to FDA was a couple of metal scrubbers, which we would call a Brillo pad, that were inside the facility, and also a scraper.
But that would not have precipitated any other inspections, and was it just focused just on the metal?
No, ma'am. We actually done a good manufacturing practice inspection during that time.
And there was nothing to suspect that there would be any other contamination in those inspections?
Like I've said, there was no red flags that would indicate a imminent health hazard inside that facility.
My understanding, Mr. Garrison, is that between 2007 and 2008, PCA had 12 positive Salmonella tests reported to them. And in that time, the department tested 35 product samples from 5 Georgia facilities. How many of those were from the Blakely plant?
There were 3 samples taken from the Blakely plant in, I believe, August of 2007.
And their first positive was in 2009. I mean, it was in June of 2007. But you didn't find any in your 3.
No, ma'am, we did not.
Since there had been a salmonella outbreak the year before that was in peanut butter, when this outbreak started to surface, did that not raise concern, and should not that have precipitated some increased inspection at peanut butter plants from either Dr. Sundloff or Mr. Garrison?
From the state perspective, when the outbreak began, we worked closely with our Department of Public Health, and their epidemiologists were monitoring the CDC calls, looking for potential causes and implicated foods, and then they would bring those to us. Once the peanut butter was brought forward as a potential, then at that point in time, the state, along with FDA, began looking at potential problems that may be associated with those facilities.
But nobody seemed to think back to March of 2007 to say, well, this is salmonella. We had a salmonella outbreak the year before. Source was peanut butter.
From a state perspective, we're constantly shuffling resources. When we can run 45 samples through our laboratory, coming into June, we were dealing with imported jalapeno peppers that, actually tainted our tomato industry in Georgia. We had melamine in products coming from China that the state was running tests on in October. So, with very limited lab resources, we're constantly moving around what we're testing and what we're looking for from a state standpoint.
If I could get just one more question, a quick question to Mr. Dybel and Ms. Cohart. Does the fact that there was a negative follow-up test on the after a positive one, how many negative tests would you consider enough to convince you that the positive test result could be ignored? Can you ignore a positive test just because you get another follow-up?
Absolutely not. If you tested 50 samples for a given lot and 49 of those were negative and 1 was positive, that 1 positive must trump the 49 negatives. The 49 negatives should never have more precedence over that 1 positive. You cannot retest away a positive result.
And I will agree with that statement wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Schakowsky, questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dybel, on April 28th, 2008, your lab confirmed that a PCA sample tested positive for Salmonella contamination. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yes, I believe so.
Okay. What would I think you said before, what would you have expected a manufacturer to do with that information?
We do a lot of consulting services for our clients, and most of what we try to get involved with is more on the front-end quality control procedures, working with clients to have.
Well, what would you expect that they would do?
In the event of a positive occurrence, we would expect that they would shut that line down or stop that production, quarantine that lot, try to figure out how that positive occurred in retesting,
okay,
but ultimately throw it out.
But actually, following that initial positive, PCA sent you additional samples from the same lot, and they also went to Dr. Cowart's firm and provided an additional sample, and those tests came back negative for Salmonella, right?
Correct. That's not unheard of.
Dr. Garrison, what is a company expected to do if there is a positive? And do you also agree that negatives don't erase the positive that has been found?
The state of Georgia Department of Agriculture would expect that company to immediately destroy the product. If it's been put in commerce, they would expect them to recall that. During our testing procedures, when we get what Ms. Cowart had referred to as a presumptive positive from a facility we regulate, we will notify industry at that point. And in most cases, As a matter of fact, in all cases, from that presumptive positive, the processing facility will either hold the product if it hadn't went out or go ahead and issue a recall just based on that presumptive.
Okay, now, between June of 2007 and September of 2008, private lab testing found salmonella on 12 separate occasions. You inspected the plant on June 10th, 2008. Did you ask if there had been any laboratory tests?
There's no evidence on our inspection reports that we ask, but that is something that the company does not have to supply to the state. That's the reason.
Do you ask, though?
I can't say in this particular instance if we ask or not.
Is it on your report form to ask?
No, ma'am. It is not something that is required of.
I know it's not required. I'm just wondering if you asked, and if a company refused to tell you because they don't have to, would that not indicate that there might be some sort of a problem? Yes. I mean, I don't understand. If there's been test after test, I think everybody here agrees that a positive test should result in a product being taken away. I think we'll change that. I hope we'll change that, so they do have to inform you. But I can't understand why that question wouldn't be asked. Is there any, can you explain that to me?
When companies are not required to give records, we don't even know if tests have been conducted.
Exactly.
And when you're dealing with the elements that we're dealing with in this case, if we think by simply asking they would tell us that they didn't have the results or that they were all negative, we're dealing with a different element here. We're dealing with something that at this point appears to have intention based in it.
I want to, there's a tab 42, an email from Stuart Parnell, the owner of PCA. And in these emails with the plant manager, Sam Lightsey, Mr. Parnell inquired about the results on the subsequent tests from Dibel. Mr. Lightsey informed Mr. Parnell that the subsequent tests were in spec, meaning they came back negative for salmonella. Although Mr. Parnell knew that this lot previously received a confirmed positive for salmonella, Mr. Parnell instructed this plant manager, quote, "Okay, let's turn them loose then," unquote. Dr. Sundloff, is this the appropriate response to these two tests, to turn the product loose on American consumers?
No, it is not, and I don't believe that is in any way the industry practice. I think this is a case in which one company has violated what I think all other companies know. Again, it is well known within the peanut manufacturing community that testing, even finding a negative, is not conclusive, that you have to take many tests, and that certainly once you find a positive test, that product cannot be considered to be safe.
When you conduct tests as the FDA, do you ask if any tests have been conducted?
I think we do, but I'm going to ask Mike Chappell to speak to that.
It certainly depends on the nature of the inspection. If you're asking whether it's a routine requirement for our investigators to ask for whatever testing, that is not our procedure, but we are changing that procedure to require that our investigators do ask what testing is being done and ask to have access to those records.
Well, hopefully, Mr. Chairman, we're going to require that those tests get reported back to the FDA. I just want to say that it's really unbelievable that Mr. Parnell knew that the food that he produced was contaminated. It escaped any inspections by the state. It got, even though the testing laboratory found that there was a positive, nothing happened. And rather than be responsible destroying these tainted products, he chose to test the same lot over again until he got the result that he wanted and then release the product to the public. We have a responsibility to change that. Thank you. Thanks for the extra time.
That concludes all the questions of the members in this round. I'm sure we're going to go a second round, but we do have two members of the full committee who are not members of the subcommittee, but they're allowed to ask questions under the rules of the subcommittee. So, Mr. Barrow, I know you've been here all day. Would you like 5 minutes of questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not as good a cross-examiner as my hero, Mr. Dingle here, and I'm not as good as Mr. Braley over there, so I'm going to throw you guys a softball. I'm going to ask you a wide, open-ended question. But listen to the conditions of it, because it might not seem that way, especially you, Dr. Sundloff. If you believe that the integrity of testing cannot be separated from the integrity of sampling, and sampling and testing are both things that have to have integrity. If you want to preserve the existing regime of voluntary inspections and confidential reporting with the testing community, but you feel it's necessary to mandate and superimpose on that a mandatory sampling and testing regime. If you want to make sure that the sampling and testing that's done isn't too rigorous, that you put folks out of business, but isn't too lax to miss stuff you need to know. In other words, if you want to do everything you reasonably can to make sure, first, that the manufacturer knows what the manufacturer needs to know when the manufacturer needs to know it, and you want to make sure that the regulator knows what the manufacturer knows, whatever it is, when they know it. How do we go about doing that? Dr. Sundloff, you go first, please.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that, again, we have asked, and we will be asking for more authority, and that is to issue preventive controls in plants. That is, they have to have a quality system in place that specifies where the critical control points are, where contaminants can be introduced.
Is a sampling and testing regime going to be a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it going to be goals or is it going to be quotas? Is it going to be something we think folks ought to look at, or is it going to be something folks are going to require to do? And so you're going to have different protocols for different sectors of the food processing industry.
Manufacturers will have to develop their own HACCP plan, which is specific to their particular manufacturing facility.
Are you going to require sampling be done by folks who have an independent stake in their work, folks who don't work for just one person or work within the company, but who have a whole bunch of clients who actually stand to lose a lot if they don't do their sampling and their testing in a credible manner?
I mean, I can't speak about how the exact program would work, but certainly there has to be these checks and balances in there that can be verified by the FDA.
You'll agree with me that folks can't be allowed to sample and test themselves.
I'm not completely sure about
when I was a boy, I learned at my daddy's knee that no person can be the judge of his own case. Don't you all know that?
Yeah, there may be ways that we could ensure the integrity even if they sample their own product and test their own product. So
I'm not saying folks can't be allowed to do that. I'm saying we need to have a sampling and a testing regime in place. In addition to the powers of mandatory recall that folks have talked about, we need to have a system in place where the manufacturer really doesn't have the option of knowing what they need to know when they need to know it. And they don't get to be the only ones who decide to act on that information. The public regulator needs to know what they know and when they know it. Don't you think that's necessary? That's the goal we need to reach for?
Yes, and that is what we are requesting.
Thank you. Well, that remains to be seen. Thank you. Anybody else want to take a stab at any of that with a little time left? How about you, Mr. Dyball? I understand the point you're making, but you realize the point I'm making, don't you? I'm not trying to drive people out of the business knowing more than they need to know, but I want to make sure they know what they need to know and that we know what they know when we need to know it.
I think there are a lot of opportunities in the subcommittee and in the discussions that we're going to be having to really build stronger bridges between government and industry and agree upon best practices that we can all use. I hope those best practices include preventative approaches rather than reactive approaches.
Well, what I want to do is I want to take you guys out of the situation of having to rat out a client in an existing regime where folks have the right to come to you and ask as a matter of entering into the contractual relationship with you that you'll keep quiet with what they got. That puts you in an untenable position. That's unacceptable. I recognize your interest there. Nobody can go forward. No part of the existing system can go forward and start doing the right thing. Everybody else is going to continue to be allowed to do the wrong thing. So I want to put in place something that doesn't let that happen. Ms. Coward, you got anything to add to that?
No, sir. I agree with that in terms of what you're talking about. I think the broader picture of how that gets done is something that we would really like to be a part of helping with the solution.
Well, get ready because I think you're going to have a chance to play a role in that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Plone for questions. You're the chairman of the Health Subcommittee where there are legislation and global FDA globalization bill that we're trying to get through for food and drug safety. So glad to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to be here for the whole hearing, but I had a hearing on offshore drilling in my other committee, and that was important in my district, so that's why I couldn't come until now. But I did want to mention, you mentioned the comprehensive FDA bill that you and Mr. Dingle have introduced, and I just wanted to say that I was pleased to see that we included some of the provisions in a food safety bill that I've had been trying to push for a number of years are now in that comprehensive bill, specifically preventative measures to ensure that food safety has been addressed. I wanted to ask Mr. Sunloff a question. In the case you're examining today, many more companies than just PCA have been involved. In fact, over 50 companies use PCA peanuts in their finished products. And what worries me about the situation is that, first, PCA did nothing to prevent their contamination, and as others have highlighted, knowingly put contaminated products on the market. But second, none of those other companies conducted adequate tests on their food items to detect and stop the tainted peanut products from making their way to consumers. And under current law, there's no requirement that the companies who are actually putting food into the hands of consumers audit or check up on their supplies to ensure the ingredients they're getting from these suppliers are safe. Now, I believe that we need to give the FDA the authority to require food manufacturers to establish food safety plans. And these plans would require food companies to evaluate what food safety risks exist, determine how best to address and protect against those risks, and establish processes and procedures to control those risks. Finally, these food safety plans would require companies to maintain records documenting that they have complied with those plans, and those, of course, would be available to the FDA. You mentioned all this in your testimony, but I just wanted to make it clear: you do agree that the FDA should have this authority to establish, to require these manufacturers to establish the food safety plans?
Yes, I do, and in fact, we do have two areas of food that do require these kinds of preventive control systems. One of them is seafood, and the other one is juice. They have to produce them under a HACCP program.
Now, do you also agree that having these sorts of requirements in place would have gone a long way towards avoiding the kind of major catastrophe that occurred here?
It's unclear because the company, it's not clear they would have kept adequate records in this case because they did get positive control or positive samples, and they chose or they shipped product anyway. If we had gone in and inspected their records and had gotten access to those records before this outbreak, certainly that would have been a warning to us, and we potentially could have prevented this.
I mean, just in a general sense, would you agree that each company in the chain of manufacturing has an obligation to ensure that the ingredients they're using, as well as their final products, are safe for Americans to consume? Okay. And then the second thing, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask was about the fines. Mr. Sunloff, again, PCA knowingly put contaminated products on the market. They knew their ingredients were going to be used by many companies in their various products. They knew the risks of this disease, and yet they did nothing. But the most alarming thing to me is the lack of repercussions for the behavior. Under current law, the most severe penalty available for committing a single prohibited act with respect to foods is a misdemeanor, which carries a potential sentence of imprisonment of up to 1 year or a monetary fine. But, you know, the FDA, to successfully prosecute these companies and impose a penalty, has a lengthy investigation and has to coordinate with the Justice Department, and it's highly intensive in terms of the resources of the FDA and Justice. I also question whether the threat of a misdemeanor conviction has any deterrent effect at all, especially in light of the situation. Now, FDA now has the authority to levy civil monetary penalties for certain drug and medical device violations, an administrative authority that permits FDA to proceed without involving the Justice Department. And for certain drug violations, FDA can impose a fine of up to $1 million for all violations adjudicated in a single proceeding. But FDA does not have that authority with respect to foods, with the exception of illegal pesticides. In your opinion, are civil monetary penalties less burdensome for the agency to impose than criminal penalties? And do you agree that having the ability to impose an administrative monetary fine would be a useful enforcement tool for the FDA?
Congressman, it's not something that I have had discussions with. Certainly, it's something that we will be talking about as in the wake of this this Salmonella outbreak, but it's not something I have an opinion on at this point.
And you don't want to express an opinion at this point?
I don't.
All right. I wish you would, but I can't force you. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. Let's go for another round. I think we're going to have votes here soon, but let's try to get a couple more questions in before we release this panel. Mr. Garrison, when I take a look at the document binder, it seems between Exhibits 15 to 37 are the Georgia's inspections of this place, and if I'm correct, by this place I mean PCA. That's about 22 different inspections, and it looked like early on, 04, 05, 06, you did not only inspections but also scale inspections. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is.
Then why the drop off after 06? I think you had one in 07 and one in 08.
On the scale inspections or on the food inspections?
Both.
The scale inspections were conducted under another section of my division.
Okay.
On the food inspections, it's basically through attrition throughout the department.
And budget cutbacks you spoke of?
Budgetary issues and those type things.
Okay, so you never did any inspection of this plant of Blakely, Georgia for Salmonella then, even though that was sort of goal to do it once a year, right?
No, sir. We would have done an inspection at least twice per year during this period of time.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Had you ever had any knowledge, anyone in your department or agency, that they were having trouble with Salmonella at this plant in Blakely, Georgia?
No, sir. It was never reported to any of our inspectors or even through our consumer complaint logs.
Okay, your last inspection was October 23rd, 2008. And when you take a look at it, it has a little bit of history of past problems that they had at this place, especially water. Water is sort of a red flag in peanut butter that there could be contamination or salmonella. Is that so?
You want to eliminate moisture from
Sure.
the peanut processing.
And that's even one of the reasons why you roast peanuts and heat them up is to get rid of the salmonella. It's got to be more than 170 degrees, if I remember correctly, correct?
The temperature would really depend on the roaster speed and the temperature there. It's a combination of the two during the roasting process.
Okay, on October 23rd, when you take a look at it, and I'm looking at the FDA's report in January 2, they indicate even in October, like they're missing dates as to the firm's temperature inadequate or just left off the recording charts, and that was never noticed by your inspectors. Wouldn't they look for the temperatures for roasting peanuts if you're doing an inspection?
When our inspectors go in, they will look at the current temperatures that are being observed at the time that they are inside the
Okay, they would look at past temperatures, see if they're being recorded.
Those would be records that they would not have to supply us with.
Okay, I had asked Ms. Cowart, and it was exhibit number 38 there, when she did a walkthrough when she was consulting with PCA, and she found 3 reasons why there could be salmonella. Number one, the Chinese product could have already been contaminated before it got there. But then after that, it was in the production and packaging. If Ms. Cowart if she just does a walkthrough and notice these things in this plant, why wouldn't your inspectors notice them? Because they're looking for the same things, aren't they?
Ms. Cowart had knowledge that the facility had a problem with salmonella. That's something that the state didn't have, and that's what we're pushing for, is for these plants in Georgia, if they have problems, they've got to let us know. The inspectors, we have to have every tool available to us.
Sure, but as inspectors, salmonella, water, peanuts, bad combinations. I just think you'd pick up on those things.
Exactly. You know, the inspections are a snapshot in time.
Sure.
What Ms. Cowart seen during her inspections may not have necessarily been there when our inspectors went through.
Well, that's why you look at the temperature records and things like that, correct?
When they have to supply them to us. That's why we go back to the HACCP requirements that Dr. Sunloff spoke about with the juice HACCP and the seafood HACCP. They have to, they're required to maintain those records, to sign off on those particular records.
But there's no way you can get those records unless they voluntarily give them to you, right?
In these type facilities, that is correct.
So, in a way, and let me, Dr. Sunloff, if you ever get I've been asking this question for 2 years, the answer's always been no. Go back to 2007, Peter Pan, you mentioned in your testimony here today. You ever get those records from Peter Pan, from ConAgra?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll ask Mike Chappell if he knows.
So 2 years, you still don't even have the records from 2007, and yet you continue to say you don't need subpoena power. Don't you think you need subpoena power?
Again, I don't know whether or not we do have the records, sir.
Just been handed a report. Ohio officials now have linked a woman's death to a nationwide salmonella outbreak, so I guess we're now up to 9 deaths and growing. Let me ask you this, Dr. Sunloff. Go to tab 11 there, if you could give them the tab book there, which is FDA's amended 483 report from January inspection. I'd like to know if each of these violations, I'll ask you about, should they be caught in a good manufacturing practices inspection? And if you could do a yes or no. Like observation number 3 on page 5. This is about the temperature being not recorded. I mentioned October 6 times it wasn't recorded. November 2008, 24 days you never recorded the temperature. In December and January, nothing was recorded. Should that have been caught by an inspection, a GMP inspection?
Yes.
All right. How about the pallets being 3 feet, observation number 4, 3 feet from the finished product, and water stains running down from the cooling unit fans in the cooler? Should that have been observed by a GMP inspection?
I'm going to have to ask Mike Chappell.
Okay, well, Mr. Chappell, should that have been caught in water stains with a GMP?
Certainly, one of the things that we do during inspection is look for environmental situations, and a water stain is an indication of a previous leak.
Okay. Plant is not, and how about observation number 5? Plant is not constructed in such a manner to allow ceilings to be kept in good repair. Should that have been caught in a GMP inspection?
One of the things that we look for to see the general condition of the building, and there are certain things that we look for, and if the building is properly constructed, it is easy to repair those, and if not, it's not.
So that's yes, then they should have caught that in a GMP. Okay, how about observation number 6? Design of equipment utensils fails to preclude adulterated food with contaminants. Specifically, the felt material is present on a final roller at the discharge. This material cannot be adequate cleaned or sanitized. Should that have been caught in a GMP inspection?
If indeed that particular equipment was in place and in use at that time, that would be an observation.
That'd be a yes then. Okay, how about number 7? Proper precautions protect food and food contact surfaces from contaminations with microorganisms cannot be taken because of deficiency in plant construction and design. So that would be there all the time. So that should have been caught by a GMP, would it not?
I think plant design is certainly one of the things that we would look at, especially as it relates to product flow and segregation.
Okay, so that's a yes. How about number 8? Specifically, the sink located in the peanut butter room is used interchangeably as a point for cleaning hands and utensil tools for washing out mops. That's not good manufacturing practices, is it?
It's not, but again, though, if indeed the investigator was there at a time it was not being used for both things, they would not necessarily have pointed that out.
Right, but a sink shouldn't be in the final product area anyway, should it? Because that's water again, isn't it an indication?
You should have water near it, yes.
Okay, how about number 10? Besides the dead and live roaches, let me ask you this. The bumper pads were inadequate. Openings of 6 inches or more were observed along sides and tops of trailers. These trailers contain raw and roasted products can be left backed up for 7 to 5 days, leaving openings in the plant. Is that GMP? Is that good manufacturing process?
That should have been observed, yes.
Okay, these violations I've just listed here, all 6 or 7 of them, all should have been caught in a normal GMP inspection. Then why weren't they in the prior inspections?
The prior inspection and for FDA that FDA conducted was 2001, so I think it depends on the conditions at the time.
Well, there was a GMP inspection. There was an inspection for cause on the metal shavings. But some of these are just structural. You can see water stains, things like that. That should have been caught, should it not?
I certainly, it should be observed during the inspection.
All right. I guess my time's up. Mr. Walden, you got questions? Mr. Deal?
Thank you. First of all, let me clarify some things that I think may have been confused here. First of all, peanuts are not an inherently dangerous product. In fact, they are inherently safe. Some of us still eat them raw. Isn't that correct?
Peanuts, because they lack water, do not support the growth of bacteria. What we've seen in the ConAgra case and in the recent case with PCA is that once Salmonella is introduced into these peanut products, it doesn't die, it just stays there, and then when it becomes ingested, then the bacteria is able to reproduce and cause disease.
But that's further in the process. Inherently, they are a safe product unless you get the occasion for something like the Chinese organic, and there you're talking about something in the organic area where the fertilizer it contains Salmonella in many instances, and that's not the traditional method and not the traditional peanut product that comes to these plants. Am I correct?
Just let me say, peanuts are grown in the dirt, and in the dirt there are lots and lots of bacteria, and Salmonella can certainly be one of those. Generally, the peanut processors require a roasting step.
And that's the kill cycle.
That's the kill cycle.
Right.
Yes.
So whatever might have been there, even though they're not inherently dangerous, a proper kill cycle would supposedly eliminate that.
That's correct.
And that's why the temperatures of the roasters, et cetera, are critical pieces of information.
Yes.
All right. Once you get through the kill cycle, then it should not have Salmonella in the peanut.
Right, and that's when the good manufacturing practices have to make sure that Salmonella is not reintroduced after the roasting process.
And that's the reason you can get inconsistent samples one day versus the next day. Presumably, if you get a bad sample and a bad report that the lab reports back to the manufacturer, their presumption, and I think anybody's common sense presumption, is that they not only would destroy the product that is bad, but also that they would take the corrective action in cleaning up the facility, doing the other good management practices that would have caused the bad sample to occur. Am I not correct, Dr. Cowart?
Yes, sir. That is correct. Yes, sir.
All right. So it is not then inconceivable or totally within reason that you might get a bad sample, somebody gets the results, they clean it up, they don't get a bad sample the next time somebody comes by or the next time an inspection takes place. But I think the thing we all are focusing on is the kinds of things that will be able to prevent the bad actors from coming along. We have a bad actor here. He did not respond in a way that would be a normal response that everybody has reasons to expect they would respond. So I guess the thing we're trying to do is to come up with ways and methods whereby we can try to prevent the bad actor from being able to slip through the holes. And that would be including maybe reporting of internal testing to outside agencies such as the State Department of Agriculture or perhaps even the FDA, the mandatory keeping of internal records that would be required to be disclosed to the inspectors when they come by so that they would know whether or not there had been periods where the kill cycle was not operating properly, or they would know if they'd gotten a bad test result back. I think those are the objectives that all of us have in mind. Is that not the general format, Dr. Sunloff, that we should be approaching this from?
Certainly, I think we need to have systems in place that are, number one, preventive, and number two, alert us early on when there is a problem.
And I think we all agree with that. And the question is, how do we achieve that goal? And since we are in the middle of a vote, I'm going to conclude. But let me conclude by having thanks to all of you for your participation here. You've enlightened us, and we do appreciate your attendance at this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Braley, any questions?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Cowart, I'd like to ask you about a document known as a certificate of analysis.
Yes, sir.
As succinctly as possible, tell us what a certificate of analysis is.
A certificate of analysis for our laboratory is the final results that we have obtained through our testing program that is issued to the client for the sample they submitted.
And what does a company do with a certificate of analysis?
With the certificate of analysis, they would look at their sample description and understand where that came from, and based on the results, they need to take action depending on the positive or negative results they get.
And let me just show you why what we're talking about is so important. This is a list of the 1,900 product recalls at the FDA as of February 10th of 2009. So when you issue a certificate of analysis, you're issuing a certification from your company to be relied upon, which has legal consequences. Isn't that correct?
I think for the company, it is their responsibility to do with it what they need to. So it is our result on the sample. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and you have a contractual obligation to make a good faith effort to perform that test to the best of your abilities,
Yes,
because
sir.
you know they're relying on your analysis for their business purposes and their regulatory compliance.
When we issue our certificate of analysis, yes, sir, we believe they're relying on us to do that.
So I'd like you to take a look at a certificate generated by your company, JLA, which is at tab 51, page 1, and we've got it up on the monitors
Okay.
if you can follow along. In this certificate of analysis, your company confirmed the product from Peanut Corporation of America tested positive as a result for Salmonella, and you can see the lot number is 8168 ABCD, and it's dated June 23rd of 2008. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Dybel, let me show you another certificate of analysis on the same tab, 51, page 3. This is your private lab's analysis of the same lot number on the same date, but your result shows that Salmonella is negative. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So just to understand, PCA sent 2 samples from the same lot to 2 private labs. JLA found Salmonella, and Dybel did not. So let's see what PCA did. PCA generated its own certificate of analysis. This is in the same tab, 51, on page 2. And PCA's report shows that its product tested negative for Salmonella. This is a certificate of analysis that PCA prepared for its customers, correct? You'll have
Yes,
to
based on
answer
this-
affirmatively.
Based on what we're looking at, yes.
Dr. Sunloff, what is FDA's position on this? Isn't it true, doctor, that it's illegal for a company to report on a certificate of analysis a negative Salmonella report when it knows that there's another lab test that shows a positive result?
I cannot speak to the legality of that. That certificate of analysis is between the laboratory and the company. Certainly, if we find that they did introduce contaminated food into the marketplace, then they are in violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
Well, are you saying that you don't know or that it doesn't apply in this context whether that would be illegal for a company to do?
I think that's part of the criminal investigation, and I can't expand.
Well, based on everything we've heard today, wouldn't you agree that if that is not an illegal practice, it certainly should be?
Certainly, if they were supplying false information to the FDA, that would certainly be an illegal practice.
Well, and we've heard testimony here that if any lot result tests positive, that takes precedent over any comparative negative test result, correct?
That is not written anywhere in the law or the regulations, but it is common knowledge within the industry that you can't test your way to negative samples.
So if it's common knowledge within the industry, isn't it true that it would make sense to have that also be applicable in the statute and the regs?
We would be happy to work with that.
And can you tell us, how can this practice be allowed? Because it's not just egregious, it's really fraudulent to the American people, isn't it? The American consumers who purchase these products.
If they're purchasing food that is purported to be something that it is not, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Walden has a question there.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know we have to get to the floor for a vote. I do have a couple of questions I'd like to be able to submit in written form to the panel for your written response. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I would concur with my colleagues and thank you for your participation today. It's been helpful in our efforts, and obviously we've got some changes to make in the federal government to protect the food supply for all Americans, and we're going to do that. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. And that concludes all questioning. I know there are many other questions members have. I want to thank all of our witnesses for coming today and for your testimony. The committee rules provide that members have 10 days to submit additional questions for the record. I ask unanimous consent that the contents of our document binder be entered into record, provided that the committee staff may redact any information as business proprietary, relates to the privacy concerns, or as law enforcement sensitive matter. Without objection, documents will be entered in record. That concludes our hearing. This meeting of the subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you all for again.